Alright, bike nerds, but we got a show for you. If you've been paying attention to the World Cup the last few seasons, it's tough to miss. All the black boxes, cables, circuitry, buttons, sensors, more cables, all attached to the bikes in the name of speed. We're not actually sure what half this stuff does. I mean, is it telling Adam Brayton how far he's gassed to flat? Is it helping Loris Vergier figure out how tight his pants should be? As the technology gets cheaper and more accessible, seems like we're seeing a new data acquisition system show up on bikes every weekend. And the more we talk to the riders, mechanics, and the engineers, it seems like the opinions about how you use this stuff is as varied as the systems themselves. How does it work? I mean, collecting data is easy, but the analysis and application, that's a whole nother story. Aside from top-tier World Cup racers and their mechanics, most of us have no experience using a proper data acquisition system, or even doing a proper suspension test. Have you ever wondered what goes on after all that stuff's collected, the numbers are crunched, and those colorful graphs are generated? You're in luck. Dave Garland called me to ask if I wanted to be the first person to put his Stendex system on a trail bike. Of course I jumped at the chance. There it is, a brand new SB150, all kitted out with a Stendex data acquisition system. It's a pretty cool system. Starting at the top, it's got a custom on-off switch to start the data logging, and that connects directly to a 4K camera that plays in real time with the graphs, so you can know exactly where you were on track. It also allows Dave to work remotely if he can't be at the races. The battery for the system tucks neatly into the head tube, and this little bolt on the side is for a custom insert that replaces your star nut, so you can still make all your necessary headset adjustments. Moving to the fork, that lower sensor is for an axle movement, so that's going to track all the bump forces coming into the suspension. And that upper sensor is a rider input sensor. It can tell if your body weight or your braking forces are pushing the suspension down. Ideally, these two lines should be pretty well matched, and you can see from this graph of my own bike that we're experiencing excessive front fork dive under braking, as well as unnecessary suspension movement due to my shifts in body weight. We're going to tune that out, and we'll get to how we did it a little bit later. On the front of the fork is a brake pressure sensor, and it knows how long and how hard you've been hitting the brakes. And since these systems talk to each other, it also knows if you're leaning over, so it'll tell you if you're braking into the corners. Dragging your brakes in the corners is like listening to Nickelback. It might feel good on your own, but you're not going to brag about it to your friends. Don't worry guys, your secret's safe with us. In the center of the bike is the central logger. Also houses additional sensors that measure dive, chassis angle, corner arc, and lean angle. On the back, that's a custom-made brake mount, which internally houses sensors that measure wheel speed, wheel lockup, rear axle movement, and also some circuitry for the rear brake pressure sensor. So with everything mounted up, it's time to hit the trails of my current hometown, the mountain bike mecca of Berlin, Germany. Yep, that's right, Berlin. And that's where we're going to be doing our suspension testing. This is Teufelsberg, a 300-foot tall man-made mountain of rubble from World War II. And while its height was once used to house an NSA spy station, it's currently home to a surprisingly good number of mini downhill tracks. It's got a bit of everything. Corners, drops, fast rough sections, loose sections, off cambers, burned corners, hucks to flat. All about a minute to a minute and a half long. With the sandy soil, when it dries out, it gets surprisingly slippery. We don't need a huge hill. We just need a familiar one. We're eliminating the variable of trying to learn a trail and get up to speed at the same time that we're making adjustments. So usually when people think of data acquisition, they often associate it with just checking out how your suspension works. But we're going to be doing quite a bit more than that. This is more of a holistic approach to riding. What is it going to tell us or you about what I'm doing and what the bike's doing?
It's really your interaction with the entire bike. You know, suspension is a part of that, but suspension can't answer all the issues that you might find out on the trail or downhill course, whatever your discipline is.
So I don't need a data sensor probably to tell me that I drag my brakes a lot in the corners, but is this going to tell me if I'm dragging my brakes in the corners?
It's going to tell you that for certain, but the rest of it will also tell you how to overcome that and be a more consistent rider and work with the bike.
So for a lot of people, becoming a better rider, for the World Cup racers that you work with, that means becoming a faster rider. For someone like me who's pushing 40, I'm not looking to get faster anymore, but will this help me possibly be a more controlled rider, a more consistent rider, or just maybe clean up some of the bad habits I've picked up in the last 10 years since I stopped racing competitively?
Sure, it will definitely help you clean up your riding. What it'll also do is make you become more consistent and give you a better outlook on what the actual bike can do for you if you go along with it.
Is it going to help me pedal up the hills at all?
No, not one bit.
One run into our test session and two things are becoming immediately apparent. I was braking way too late and for too long into the corners, and my suspension was not providing nearly enough support at the fork and the shock. It may have felt fast, but you can see from my onboard camera that the suspension is bottoming way too easily, and the rear shock is struggling to rebound from deep in its travel. Looking at the data from the two sensors on the fork, ideally, these two graphs should be pretty closely aligned. Instead, it's indicating a great deal of brake dive, as well as rider-induced compression. The picture doesn't get a whole lot better looking at the balance between the front and rear axles, with the rear shock using considerably more of its travel than the fork. We had some work to do. At the rear shock, this meant lightening the high-speed rebound a touch to help the shock return from deep in its stroke just a little bit quicker, and also adding a couple of clicks of low-speed compression to see if we couldn't make it sit up just a tiny bit more. At the fork, we added 4 psi, bumping us up to 80, and added 4 clicks of low-speed compression. So changes we made so far after looking at the data last night is we've added, I think, +4 more clicks of low-speed compression, so I think it's now +10.
Yeah.
And we've sped up the rebound. I've taken 4 clicks out, so I think it's now about +16 maybe? No, I'm sorry, not +16. It's about +6 or 7.
Yeah.
And the damper is brand new. It's my second day on the Charger 2.1. We're still running high speed, fully open, but now we've got the low speed compression 4 clicks in, where we'd started with everything fully open yesterday. So.
Yeah. We just, we need to begin to balance it out, your attack speed as you get quicker and quicker, because what we don't want is the fork to begin to sit up too much and not engage its travel to manage that bump force.
All right.
So we'll keep a check on that.
So I should go bang out some more runs.
Yeah, let's do it.
Woohoo! Couple runs, the new setting, I noticed in a few places, it's sort of my own fault, I was a little bit too far in the back seat, and the front wheel got light and would get away from me a little bit, like a station wagon with too many people in the back. So my first inclination is to take out some of that low-speed compression damping that we put in, to make up for the fact that I'm not always going to have perfect form and I'm going to be tired.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
We've now engaged some good support from the fork. Charger cartridge is working good. Low speed has given us some more setup. We're still getting a little bit of deep travel from the rear, and that hasn't gone away yet. Okay, it's made it a little worse because we've now got some support from the fork. But on the graph, you're still going to bottom too quickly. So we need to try and allow the rear damper to sit up a little bit more in low speed. before we go and make any air pressure adjustments, we have to see where the usable range of low speed is to get this bike balanced out. Like yesterday's graph and the graph from run 2 show that completely, that we're close to making a good general adjustment. Just need to drive the rear a little more.
All right, so we're gonna a couple more clicks of the little blue dial.
Let's go one
more,
another run, and then add one. Small increments gets us perfect. At the top graph, we're looking at your front and rear axle travel. Yesterday, the blue line, which shows us our compression and rebound stroke on rear axle, was really tall yesterday, and the fork was really not engaging very much travel. Now, just with adding low speed compression on the fork and rear damper, we're beginning to get some stability. The front and the rear, as you can see on the graph, are beginning to become, they look more like each other, which is our goal. We've still got a little bit of work to do on low speed compression on the rear damper before we begin to make any other adjustment. Your frame vertical movement, you always have to look at the scales, because the scales are different on each graph, are not bad. The bike is beginning to, the main frame is beginning to isolate you from suspension movement, which is our end goal. We're just looking at one other parameter here, and that's Lee's input to the front end in relation to axle movement. If those two mirror each other and they look almost the same, the balance that you've got and the input that you're putting into the front end is zero. They're equal. So you're not pushing through into the bike and creating independent movement independently of suspension movement. So if you look at the graph and you look at front and rear axle, front axle and rider input, that should look almost the same. And you've got some inputs here where if you see this turquoise line, that you're pushing in and making the front end dive a little, but generally the balance is pretty good all the way. And that's one of the other key things that we're looking for, you know, your input. And the less input you create, the better stability you've got.
So some of that rider generated input that I'm making, would that be sometimes pumping into the face of a jump?
Yeah.
So that wouldn't necessarily be all bad.
No, because you still have to generate a certain amount of force to the ground yourself to give you independent amounts of grip. It's like isolated grip, you know, your suspension can't do everything. So sometimes you have to join in to create some extra force to the ground.
But when I push down on it, there's times where I want it to push back a little bit, or I'm not going to get grip. I'm just going to push my handlebars into my suspension.
Yeah.
All right. So one more click of low speed in the back, and we're ready.
Yeah, let's
get back at it.
Let's get another run in.
Loose as though. Added a little more low speed to the back end again, and took out a click of high speed compression, which might just be a function of the cold. I don't know, but that was by far the best feeling run yet. You can see on the left is our original settings, and on the right is the recording from our very last test run. Shocks are sitting up a little bit higher in their travel, and the fork in particular is a whole lot more resistant to bottoming out. Honestly, we didn't make huge adjustments. We made small incremental adjustments to make a significant difference in the way the bike handled. The result, a much more stable ride, consistent geometry, and a lot more corner speed. Ultimately, I went 3 seconds faster than my old time on a 1-minute track. That's huge. You were watching it, I mean, you have the data, but you're also watching it just with eyes on.
Yeah.
What are you seeing?
Your entry speed is good because you're set up slightly, which allows you to just be a bit more proactive in the corner. You're pushing into the corner, but exiting, the bike is wanting to follow you out of the corner. So when you go to grab another pedal stroke, and it's sometimes if your bike is sat a little too low, like you exit the corner and you feel a little like this, it's beginning to follow you out. So the dynamic of it is much better. So, and it puts the geometry of the bike back into its best possible position, ready for the next bump force.
It's interesting for you to say that. I've always noticed my bike sort of sit kind of low when I pedal out of the corners, and I kind of just assumed it was sort of just a function of running soft bikes or longer travel in flat corners, and I just kind of learned to live with it. I've never tried to tune that trait out.
I mean, we from yesterday to right now is a pretty different world, you know. But we have to remember we're on an enduro bike. We're not on a downhill bike. We have to take an average of everything because it has to do everything. So we have to remember that.
But if nothing else, it's a solid baseline that I can tune from.
Absolutely.
And something to always come back to.
So you go to EWS or whatever your next race is, knowing that your low speed support comes from this setting here, because we're in a place where it's not a lot of bump force, so we have to rely on low speed to give us that support.
So for me, this is obviously my first time collecting any kind of tangible data about my bike. And for you, Dave, you've had years of World Cup experience using these systems, and it's outfitted with the entire Canyon team. What have you learned from putting on a trail bike for the first time? Are there any big differences?
Forces front to rear are markedly different from downhill. They're going to be anyway, but if you look at downhill, the forces are relatively same front and rear axle movement, especially in G. Today I've learned that you're producing about 18 G on the front, but 26, 27, 28 on the rear. Okay, the wheelbase is slightly shorter, but also we have an air damper. So you have an additional add-in with your air spring at end stroke, which also produces some force. So, and I've not seen forces like that. So it's a good learning curve for me.
But we weren't here just to collect data about the suspension and the bike. We were also here to collect data about my riding. You can tune the bike to be as good as it can be, but it's not going to ride itself. We spent a lot of time looking at my braking technique, and walking back up the track each time also gave me some opportunities to look at my own line choice.
The most important thing is to keep your braking really tidy. You know, you look at the data system and it tells you, keep the braking simple, keep it clean, keep the stab effect, get the braking done before the feature, get the braking done way before the corner, carry all the speed through the corner. It constantly reminds you, be clean with braking.
All right, come clean, tell the truth. How was my braking?
Today, pretty good. It was a stab. It was on, off, straight back to zero as soon as possible. The recovery of the bike going in and out of the corner is way better because it's in its best possible geometry for corner speed.
Case in point, we've come up to this section of drops right here that they don't look so bad from this angle, but the corner is way down there. And all of your braking is done right here. You can come off this drop as fast as you want. The problem is you won't land in time before you hit that second drop, and there's not enough space to get your braking done. If you don't get it done there, you send yourself into the corner upright, and then you sell yourself into both those trees.
Here's an example of line choice and suspension settings coming together. Some for the better and some for the worse. Everything starts out fine. I carry good speed across the off camber, get on the brakes hard and late, but you'll notice I'm offline. That slight miscalculation means instead of slowing down on dirt, I'm going to tag that rock, get bucked, ride a bit of a nose wheelie, and barely make the corner because my rear wheel wasn't on the ground at all to slow down. Imagine doing that on my original settings with a fork that was diving, a rear that was squatted down that couldn't absorb the bump. I'm going to get kicked even higher. The brake force is going to send the front end down. I'm going to ride that nose wheelie even longer. Chances are I don't make that corner and I end up in the trees. That's the difference between losing 10 seconds in an enduro stage or just blowing a corner and cracking on with it. In the rear shock, we never changed the pressure, and we stuck with 2 volume reducers. But at the beginning of the test, we were really light on low-speed compression and really heavy on rebound. By the time we were done, we doubled the low-speed compression, taken a little bit of high speed out to balance it with the new damper and the fork, and we'd sped up the rebound considerably. Up front, we'd move from 76 psi in the fork up to 80. We left 1 volume reducer in there the entire time, and we started with an open low-speed compression setting and ended up 4 clicks in. We never ended up closing off the high-speed compression because the bumps here are on the smaller side and they come at you pretty quickly, so we wanted the fork to move really fast to keep traction. On the rebound side, we also sped things up from 12 clicks in, fairly slow on the fork, to only 10 clicks in. Small adjustments, but a huge difference in the way the bike rode.
Did we make me a better rider? It's a bit of a loaded term, but
Yeah.
how do we do?
Well, if we take from the first afternoon where our first conversation was the bike felt good, you were happy with the way it felt, it was kind of stable,
Yeah, someone
the
asked me.
settings were good.
Someone asked me how is it. I'm like, it was great, super stable.
So after those runs, we could see that there was an imbalance front and rear. We went after those adjustments. Normally, if you weren't able to look at how the imbalance was, it would be a guessing game always.
Yep.
So given that and where we ended up today with a stable bike, more grip, more entry and exit speed, a little more commitment, a better feeling, so it can only be a bag of pluses, it can't be any minuses, but you still have to put the work in.
I still have to pedal up myself every time.
Yeah.
But you mentioned I also looked better on the bike.
Yeah, you lost this crouch thing going on, especially when you went off drops and you're getting ready to be pushed forward a little bit. So your CFG automatically you feel like you need to be lower.
Yeah.
Now you're in an attack position. Your entry into a corner is looking up, and for the exit of the corner, and you could just tell, there's more confidence in the way you ride. So yes, it's made you a better rider in a day and a half for me.
And you mentioned that crouch position. Some of that comes from riding a bike before that was possibly a bit too short for me.
Yeah.
But also having suspension that, in hindsight, was a bit too soft. We didn't go up greatly in air pressure in the back. It was me compensating a little bit for knowing I was going to have a harsh landing,
Yeah.
and sort of trying to put my weight down gently rather than just letting my weight fall where it would and letting the bike do its job. From my perspective, I honestly thought, we'll make some changes. I'll go, yeah, that's nice. I'll probably go back. That bike was comfortable. I can't emphasize enough the feeling of the ride that I had yesterday morning, which was the best I thought I got, which felt so much better than my previous settings on my old bike. I would never ride it like that way again. It was soft and marshmallowy and comfortable, but we've set the bike up now where you look at the graphs and the chassis is level.
Yeah.
The bump force and the suspension and my force into the dampers is about the same.
Yeah.
It feels super stable. I've got something to push on when I go to corners. Now when I push down, I'm pushing my knobs into the dirt. Before I was just kind of pushing my fork down.
Yeah.
So it felt like I was doing much. I was moving around.
Yeah.
And I could feel how much faster I'm exiting corners. I could feel how much faster I could go into sections because I wasn't worrying about, I'll have to absorb the landing with my legs and my arms as much. My bike's doing that work for me.
Yeah.
It's great. And I know it was a little cold today, and we did just kind of ride one set of trails over and over. And I do worry when I do some enduro racing that I might get fatigued and I might need to dial those settings back. But we have a base setting that's pretty spot on.
Yeah.
And we're going to be, I reckon within a click or two.
Yeah.
Either way. That helped clean up my riding and my bike setup.
Yeah.
But this isn't going to be the only tool in the chest for sure.
No, it's one of the tools you use to be highly accurate in critical situations. If you can read every situation accurately, you never make a wrong adjustment.
Yeah, it's great. That bike has never been faster. I've been riding those trails for 3 years. I've never ridden down that trail as fast as I did today. So, cheers to that.
Cheers. Thank you.